so good. What the heck? That's like so relatable and like on point. Let's go. What?
That took a lot of time to write.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Iris and I'm an incoming freshman at Stanford University studying computer science and economics. In this video, we're going to be going through my friend's successful Stanford supplemental essays and common application essay. Since we have so many successful essays to cover, it's going to be a pretty long video, so feel free to go to the description and find the timestamp of the part that you feel like would be most helpful to you. My friends come from all over the world, from Spain to Palestine to India to the United States, so I hope this will give you a wide array of perspectives on what potential essays could look like and ultimately help you craft your own successful college application essay. Give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to stay tuned for more college related content, and I'll see you in the next one. Let's start with the short takes, which are 50 characters long. The first one is, what 5 words best describe you?
Blended, refreshing, honeyed, cool, and flavorful. And then in parentheses, I put just like my boba order because I talked about boba in my roommate essay.
Driven, outspoken, audacious, strong-willed, and superstitious.
Curious, rebellious, creative, intellectual, and genuine.
I put dream it, ? Let's do it.
For my answers, I went kind of basic. I described myself as inquisitive, resourceful, diligent, insightful, and ambitious.
Mine was a little different. I was hoping you'd ask me that. So I went with, my answer was, I'm a big boy now. That's what I put in the Stanford application.
Generous, but I capitalized the gene part because I'm very interested in genetics. So that's, then I wrote resilient, hybrid, Ines, because that's my name, and then positive with a plus instead of the T.
Now for the second question, we have another short take. What would you do with an extra hour in a day and why? 50 characters.
I said that I wanted to spend the hour learning Spanish because currently my Spanish is very classroom Spanish. So I said I wanted to expand my Spanish so I could use Spanish to interact with the Hispanic population in my community better.
So basically, once I made fried eggs for my dad, who transformed me into an object of scorn when eggshells were found on his plate. And he asked me whether I felt embarrassed for being unfeminine. So with my extra hour, I will cook another egg with the same recipe and proudly remain a woman who cannot cook.
I would cherish my family and friends and spend more time with my beloved ones, as my academics and extracurriculars fill the most of my day. And I would also lay down and pick a novel and start reading.
I wanted to talk about how with an extra hour, I would make the rest, the other 24 hours better. So I just basically talked about things that I would do to make the rest of the day better, such as cook a proper meal, maybe, but it was just more basic, but just to make the rest of the day better.
I should possibly spend the extra hour doing some more physical activity, but knowing myself, I doubt that's going to happen. Most likely, I'll just spend it watching and analyzing decades-old soccer matches and taking naps.
As a preface, in hindsight, I feel like some of my essays are super cringy, but that's okay, and I'll share them anyways. I wrote, I would spend it using my left hand in an attempt to develop the right hemisphere of my brain, responsible for creativity. I will channel my inner Da Vinci and strengthen my weaker 5-fingered friend. Left hand versus toothbrushing, tracing letters on kindergarten printouts, and volleyball jump serving? Challenge single-handedly accepted.
I would spend more time exercising and cooking to care for my physical needs, while also exploring different workouts and recipes. Exercising gives me an extra boost of energy in my day, and I love cooking because I'm able to connect with people through making and sharing food.
The third prompt from the Stanford short takes is, what historical event or moment do you wish you could have witnessed? 50 characters.
Korea was declared independent from Imperial Japan on March 1st, 1919.
That took a lot of time to write. I landed on the release of the first Apple Macintosh, the computer for the rest of us, in 1984. And I also wrote the Apollo 11 landing on the moon.
I talked about the chocolate wars. So basically what I wrote was, the clandestine nature of the chocolate wars has always made me question the virtue of human ideas. Time traveling to these chocolate factories will not only satiate my sweet tooth, but will also allow me to witness answers to key questions. To what extent are human ideas truly one's own?
I wrote, I would love to have been a stowaway on Darwin's Beagle. sailing around the Galapagos. I would have loved to witness that almost pure natural setting and simultaneously a seminal moment in science where we began to understand how everything was related and we were related to everything.
My historical event was the fifth Solvay conference held in Brussels. I don't know if you guys have seen the picture, but it's that iconic picture of literally all the famous scientists you've ever heard of. It's got Einstein and Schrodinger and all of them. So I talked about that for a line, and I just ended with, I want to sneak into the iconic photograph too.
For mine, I wrote, in 1596, John Harrington harnessed fluid mechanics to invent the first flushable toilet, a tool we appreciate every day. And then in brackets I wrote, I'm sorry. It's genuinely fascinating, a great user experience that also extends lifespans through sanitation. I'd love to witness the invention's demonstration. How did people react to the slightly inappropriate yet revolutionary idea?
During World War II, Jack Churchill joins the British commandos for fun, boldly charging into battle with an archaic broadsword and longbow. Captured by the Germans, he nonchalantly plays his bagpipes and eventually escapes out of boredom. I admired Churchill's adventurous spirit and eagerness to escape from mundane life, even during adversity. So Jack Churchill was brother of Winston Churchill, and he signed up to fight World War II for fun. And basically, while everyone else had guns and ships, he came with like a longbow and a broadsword and playing bagpipes. So he's like an absolute troll.
Fourthly, what's the greatest challenge that society faces today?
The lack of empathy stands as a detrimental ground in the battle of ego and the expense of morality. People don't care enough to fight for immigrants because they aren't one. They don't care enough to fight for college affordability because financial struggles were never an option for them.
That's pretty cliche, but I wrote global warming, and I wrote the reason is that it requires enormous scientific and technological challenges, and it requires a great deal of collaboration and policies. Moreover, it's an extremely urgent challenge, leaving us with a little to no time.
Upholding the integrity of democracy. As the accessibility of social media proliferate the spread of fake news, individuals' ability to cast rational judgments through voting deteriorate. The challenge then is to permit the use of social media without further endangering the status of democracy.
What I wrote was, it is usually said that what distinguishes humans from other species is our ability to collaborate with each other. However, nowadays, I think that this is something that could be improved. With more cooperation between countries, religious affiliations, and politicians, problems like global warming, poverty, and war could be remedied.
We live in a changing cultural landscape where forming deep, authentic relationships with others is more difficult. Instead, many relationships are surface level and defined by superficial details. It becomes easier to feel disconnected and isolated despite being surrounded by people, and harder to fulfill emotional needs for filial love.
Mine was kind of cringy. I don't like this one a lot, but it was the creation of a large strata living in its own virtual bubble without having a grasp of real life skills and ground realities is a huge problem. With most of daily communication and research taking place in the virtual space, most of us have less exposure to physical realities.
There's a lack of public understanding of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, neurotech, and genetics. These are developing more quickly than we'd expect. An embryo was genetically edited this year. If not carefully considered, these technologies will further exacerbate inequalities by creating genetically superior humans or removing vital labor jobs.
Fifth, how did you spend your last 2 summers?
Building a food sharing company with 3 other high schoolers while living in Boston for a month, interning at an ambitious agricultural startup, organizing a local Paralympics, lots of cello, summer reading, and time with family.
The last 2 summers, I visited Stanford for my brother's graduation. I volunteered as an English language teacher assistant. I learned mobile and web development on my own. I learned basic graphic design and video editing. I sang around Gaza as a part of the Sununu choir, and I played soccer with friends.
In 2018, I represented Thailand at the World Schools Debating Championships. I coached younger students to compete in national level debating tournaments, and I arranged my grandma's funeral. In 2019, I attended the Telluride Association summer program. I spearheaded preparations for a gender-based violence law conference for Thai undergraduate law students, and I hosted weekly discussion circles on gender-based violence, and I also worked in fashion retail.
I volunteered in a Buddhist temple in Sri Lanka, participated in Yale's Young Global Scholars Program, interned at the Stanford Genome Technology Center for 9 weeks, took care of my grandmother, hiked every week with friends, and finally returned home to enjoy the last sunny days of summer in Spain.
Wait, how? That's like on my bucket list for so long. How did that happen?
I mean, it was just like I wanted to volunteer, and so basically I found a community of volunteers in Sri Lanka in a small city, and then I just communicated with them, and I stayed over. It was really cool.
Wow. I feel like mine is also cringy, but whatever. I wrote 2018, : After my startup Genome moved into Consensus, I worked as a blockchain developer there. I performed magic tricks on the streets, advised startups at incubators and accelerators. 2019, : Machine learning development at IBM, taught myself Java, organized an epic scavenger hunt race competition for a friend's birthday, spoke at global conferences, and then in brackets I wrote the conference names, and then Japan trip.
My 2 summers were in 2018, I was in the Olympiad training camp. Then I worked for a reputation model for a blockchain-based platform. Did some independent research work related to computational geology, and I was watching the World Cup, Soccer World Cup. Then 2019, I finished my research paper. I developed a business model for an app which connects electric vehicle charging stations. And, I led this campaign against single-use plastic in the city.
Mine is a little bit cringy. I said I led my academic decathlon team, coached students on speech, volunteered locally for One Generation and Key Club, binged all 9 seasons of How I Met Your Mother and romantic K-dramas while I liked someone in an unfortunate, unrecreated way. Not recommended. Interspersed with after song covers and food ventures.
Here in the 6th question, we're going to start on the essay responses. The first one is, what's meaningful to you and why? 250 words.
Basically, I used like the coffee shop as a metaphor for our community. And I talked about how when you walk into a coffee shop, you see people from all different like spectrums of life, I guess. So I said, when I walk into a coffee shop, I'm able to witness all the diversity and the vibrantness of my community, which is meaningful to me.
While many people find inspiration in an influential character or celebrity, I find inspiration in people close to me. My grandma, who passed away 6 months ago, was a source of inspiration stronger than any other I can think of. Born in 1936, she lived through British mandates, was forcibly expelled from her home and became a refugee in 1948, experienced the difficulty of living under the Israeli occupation and the subsequent blockade over her home in Gaza. She lived in a village, in a refugee camp, and in a city. Her life conditions, however, never seemed to weaken her. I remember in the latest military operation over Gaza in 2014, my siblings and I used to sleep at her place. While she was visibly fearful sometimes, she never seemed to lose hope of a possible solution. She always wanted to go about her days as if nothing is happening. Additionally, she always wanted to push her children and grandchildren to achieve their potential even though she didn't attend school beyond 3rd grade. She managed to raise a family of 10 kids in a refugee camp until they all earned college degrees. My grandma is meaningful to me because despite multiple rough patches in her life, I never heard her complain, and she always gave more than she had. She was stronger than war and softer than peace, and will always be an inspiration for me to face life challenges head on and to remain determined regardless of life conditions.
Something that is meaningful to me is period poverty activism. I talked about how when I was younger, it was so embarrassing to have your period, and we would go to swimming classes, and all the boys would be like, "Ooh, would you have like blood pee? Nasty. Ooh, so embarrassing," type of thing. And so I kind of grew up feeling like very ashamed about this like whole issue, and I ended up creating these open mic night events, which were basically using sanitary pads as entry tickets so that people would be forced to go to a public supermarket and buy sanitary pads. and sort of, I guess that's a way to like combat the stigma. So that's what I talked about.
One, I wrote about how basically by having gone to the US as an international to basically like seek out opportunities, I basically, when I was in Spain, I would go around schools and try to tell kids my age that they could also do that by pursuing scholarships and opportunities that maybe did not exist in Spain and that were available in the US. And that was very meaningful to me because it just connected me more to my community. And
I wrote, I was born in Madagascar, a country lacking economic, educational, and social opportunities. The reality is that all of my friends back home will likely never get a chance to escape vicious cycles of poverty, regardless of how hard they work. To tackle poverty, I became fascinated with leverage and scale, the concept that in groups, the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts. I searched for people tackling global issues, surprisingly finding startups were making substantial impact. As a result, I spend my time in startup accelerators and frequently travel to Silicon Valley to network with investors and founders. And then I talked about the startups that I founded and what happened to them and that journey. And then I ended with, I want to advocate for and give back to international communities at scale. And then I talked about what I was doing to do that. And then I said, I can't wait to build startups out of our dorm rooms because I can't wait to do that.
I started out with a recipe. So I started with a recipe for coconut chicken curry. I started out with a list of ingredients and I said, this is a recipe for Vietnamese coconut chicken curry that my mother passed down to me. This is a recipe that my grandfather passed down to my mother before dying when she was 11 years old. So basically, I said that my experience cooking with my mother in the kitchen was deeply meaningful to me because it connects me with my family and culture. And even though I've never met my grandfather, obviously some influence has been passed down to me through this recipe, through how my mother raised me. And at times when my mother would cook different recipes, she would sit me down while like the curry was boiling and just tell me about her life experiences. So at the end of the essay, I said, by learning more about my family history, I gain a greater understanding of my roots and identity, proudly claiming Tôi là người Việt Nam, or I am Vietnamese.
I went with that creating a significant impact with my knowledge. That's the typical cliche part. But basically, my answer was about an anecdote, which, you know, I live in New Delhi, which has recently become one of the most polluted regions in the world. So the other day, I was going through my newspaper, and the headline was, Delhi's air quality has improved to poor. So generally it's hazardous and now it's improved to poor. So I started off with that, and then I talked about how I, work to develop this system where an app through which electric vehicle charging stations are connected and you can book stuff and whatever, because to encourage electric vehicles. Because right now here the main reservation people have is that if you do get an electric vehicle, what about if you have to travel a longer distance and you can't find a charging station, which is technically called range anxiety. So I just talked about that.
Next essay question: reflect on an idea or experience that makes you excited about learning. 250 words.
I basically talked about the intersection between science and Christianity because I'm like fascinated by both science and Christianity, and oftentimes there's a notion that, like Christianity is not backed by scientific proof. And I talked about how like I find peace in the intersection between the two and how I intend to delve deeper into both instead of like focusing on the contradicting aspects of it.
I wrote about how we should be genuine to be creative, and I gave Steve Jobs as an example, and I said that there are 7 billion humans living on this earth. So we all know Steve Jobs, so why do we know him? And it's because he's genuine and he does the things that he really cares for and he thinks that would change the world. And I did put some quotes from his speech at Stanford.
My intellectual curiosity was about the time I wrote a research paper on how ladyboys in Thailand construct their gender identity. And I mostly talked about how Buddhism in Thailand has influenced the way people see them and how as a result this reflects the way they present themselves to society.
I talked about basically developing my interest on chemistry and biology, and my mom runs the catering from my house, so I started talking about how from there I looked at the chemistry behind food and stuff like that, and then little by little I used that knowledge to look more deeply into other things, and then how I found my internship to do genetic engineering and discover a bit more about that.
For intellectual vitality, I talked about scientific curiosity, so like doing self-directed research rather than learning science through ordinary textbooks, because it's a trial and error process. You mess up, but you try again and you learn through that process, and it's a lot more exciting than just sitting down reading through articles or textbooks, even though that's fun too. And so I talked about how I felt when there was so much about science that I didn't know, when I barraged lecturers with questions, my science mentors with questions, and I was able to learn so much and also bring that knowledge back to the classroom to share with underclassmen students. Just that transfer of knowledge between people and scientific curiosity.
I talked about how my main motivator is to do things in a better way and all, and how it has been this way from a very young age. And I ended with the story of how I, started a social work related to, providing education through a different doctrine, and, how I ran the social media campaign about it.
I begun by talking about how the next evolution of humans will likely merge artificial intelligence with our brains. And then I talked about developments in the neurotech industry. And they're I'm actually very interested in this. It's very wacky. Researchers have been able to detect imagined speech. So if you think the word pineapple, researchers at Berkeley with implanted electrodes are able to know what word you're thinking of. And Ray Kurzweil thinks that by the 2030s, we might just all have brain chips. And he used to be the head of engineering at Google. So I wrote that the implications are frightening, but I believe this is a likely future, and how that drove me to learn more about neurotech. So then what I did in neurotech, and then where all those projects went, and then what I hope to do with neurotech at Stanford and in my life in the future.
Final Stanford supplemental essay, write a letter to your future roommate. 250 words.
I feel like the roommate letter or the roommate essay, they're really just trying to see your personality and not anything else. So I think you just need to be yourself. I wrote it as if I was texting the person, so I added acronyms, and I texted in all lowercase, so I wrote the letter in all lowercase.
I made it a song parody. Dear Future Husband by Meghan Trainor. I just made it Dear Future Roommate. So I twisted the lyrics for the song.
I talked about how I speak 4 languages, and how sort of I always mess up when I talk, because sometimes I can't quite figure out what language I'm supposed to speak in, and sometimes I combine words and combine different languages in one sentence. And I thought I had a serious language deficiency for a while, and I chored it and everything. But then basically my conclusion to my roommate was you know what? It's just because I'm just this messed up, confused person, and I think that's what makes me really special. So yeah, I hope you like me.
I talked about how I come from Gaza, which is an area under blockade. So I talked about how hard it would be moving from this blockaded area to Stanford, which is a full diverse place, and with all this modern technology and all these people from all around the world. So I talked a bit about how it would be challenging to transform from here to there.
So I would say this was my worst essay because I did it on a 6-hour trip to Marbella, which is a region in Spain. So on the last day, so really bad. But I basically talked about how I share a room with my sister, and we basically have rules and things like that. I mean, not rules, but and so I talked about that, and then about the possibility of establishing our friendly rules and friendly traditions with my future roommate.
I started out my short essay with an apology. I said, "To whom it may concern. First and foremost, I apologize in advance for taking long showers and using all the hot water, singing awful renditions of pop songs, snoring loudly, leaving dirty dishes in the communal sink, eating all your food, neglecting laundry, not turning off lights at night, and accidentally waking up at an ungodly hour. But I followed up those negatives with a positive note. I said, but on a more positive note, my food is your food, and talked about how I like cooking, and sometimes I'll share food, but I don't guarantee the food is good because sometimes I make really inedible things, like it can be burned, undercooked, oversalted, bland, etc. But like I talked about, like even as like a friend or a roommate, I always be there. And if you ever stress, maybe I'll leave like a bowl of cut fruit by your desk, something like that.
Yeah, so mine started off by telling that my name means somebody who is like someone knowledgeable in something, but that's not really true. And other than that, I just talked about how I am as a roommate, because I'm somebody who likes to keep the environment, light and all. I'm not serious all the time. So I talked about video games and stuff, and how I have this habit of whistling whenever I concentrate and stuff. So if you're against that, it might be a problem. Although, like, maybe I could learn your favorite songs and stuff, so I could whistle that. So maybe that'll be somewhat some kind of truce or something. Other than that, I was just like, I'm an only child, so I've never had a roommate. So you don't have any ex-roommate standards to live up to. So I guess that'll be easier for you too.
So for mine, I wrote it at like 5 a.m. the night that it was due, or like the day before it was due. So my brain was very weird, and I wrote my entire thing rhyming. And then, so I just talked about myself rhyming, talked about what I like to do, like everything that I like to do that I didn't mention elsewhere. It was just like very random. And then at the end, I wrote, I'm in a park, like to end my poem, I'm in a park right now and I'm running out of wit because I just stepped on some dog poo and said, crap, it's some strong first principles thinking. We can definitely question assumptions and break conventions. So I liked that part because I was like it was obvious that I was going to rhyme with like shit, but I didn't. And then I wrote that we would break conventions.
Last but not least, out of everything you could have written in the world, how did you come up with your Common App topic, and what advice do you have for future applicants?
In high school, I was most heavily involved in research regarding like the food insecurity and how to use satellite imagery to fix food insecurity. So I just talked about what got me interested in that topic in the first place, and that's kind of like my background growing up in Korea, and like seeing all the agriculture and the farms in Korea. So I like talked about how like my background in that kind of developed into this passion. And I feel like food insecurity isn't really a popular like topic or like a major even. So I think that kind of like served as my niche.
You should put yourself in that essay. So it was really hard to choose something to write in just 650 words. So I end up writing about how I became interested in Stanford and such top schools in the US in general. So I talked about how living in Gaza changed my perspective toward people and made me interested in political science to defend my people. And I also talked about how it also made me interested in computer science to better the life of the people who live here.
I guess I'm someone who writes serious topics very well. I'm not a humorous person. I'm just good at sort of pulling everyone's heartstrings. And so I talked about my mother and I, and how growing up we've always had these cultural barriers because of my mom growing up under Chairman Mao during the Cultural Revolution, and sort of how has that impacted how she sees the world. And I just talked about our differences and sort of how we finally resolved them.
When choosing a Common App topic, for me at least personally, it was hard because I didn't have one specific thing that I wanted to talk about. And yeah, because there were so many other questions, I had to try and balance the Common App topic with the rest of the other essays for Stanford and other universities. I kind of merged two of the things I do into just one. So I started talking about ice skating because I used to compete, and I went to an international ice skating competition, and so I talked about looking at the ice rink in the morning as a blank canvas. It's a bit cheesy. And then I talked about going this summer to Stanford and I spent like almost 3 months there doing research, and how that was like another opportunity for it to be a blank canvas. And I talked about my summer, which was good for Stanford. It may be not very good if you're applying to other universities, because it was very focused on Stanford. So that's maybe one thing I didn't do very well.
So the only suggestion that I have is like start your essays early, because as much time as you spend on them, the more your essays improve. Like personally speaking, my essays which I submitted in November or October or something, and the ones I submitted in December, the December ones were objectively superior, because it's not just about the language and the revisions you do. It's about the perspectives you gain throughout the process. Like you read stuff, you understand stuff. So starting early is like imperative. And other than that, my Common App essay was kind of a personal story about my journey, how I got into research and the impact it has. So it was written in a very interesting format. It had a very catchy beginning, and it talked about a long-time project of mine, which I'd been doing for like 5-6 years now, and it talked about how I got into it, and the story was pretty interesting. So I personally didn't have a lot of trouble choosing my Common App, but I can understand that if you are choosing between three or four of them, it can be something which you'll have to spend a lot of time over.
I totally agree with what Vedant said. I had so much trouble writing my Common App. I was like, how on earth am I supposed to do this? The essays that I wrote in the summer and like in September, and the ones I submitted to like my early action schools, were so bad. And like they just like developed so much since then. Like the more time that I had, like it got exponentially better. And Stanford was like the last application I submitted, and like when comparing it from the first application I submitted, I think there's like a huge delta of like the things that you want to show. So for my Common App, so at the beginning, I tried to do the things where like I would try and summarize my whole life in the Common App, but I think at the end, what I found to be most effective was to like focus on like a specific moment in my life. So I talked about like I was in like an aggressive conversation, and then I found myself like playing a game of egos, like a zero-sum power game, and then I was like, this is stupid in my head. Like I thought it like, and I didn't want to play this zero-sum game. So then like this happened in real life. So then I started like talking about happiness and like Aristotle's eudaimonia, and it was very like I just waxed on about philosophy, and then talked about at the end how this moment changed me, because I realized that before I would spend a lot of time being like involved in like technicalities and knowledge, like because I was in an environment where I was supposed to share knowledge, but then I recognized after this moment that without people connecting authentically, like they're not open to hear each other or like gain new knowledge. So you actually first need to like personally connect with people and like focus on like getting to know people and being happy. And so I wrote like now I focus more on like connecting emotionally with people, and like I love like sharing life updates. So I will continue fostering relationships and positive sum games to build world-changing startups was my end. I think I also like that might have been helpful. I actually have no idea. I was very I was very clear that I was like a startup person in this application, and I found that other applications of schools that I got rejected from, I was like less concentrated and I was more breathy.
Yeah, they say like it's good to have a breadth, but I had the same kind of experience. Like in the college apps where I was a bit more specific towards what I liked and, you know, more straight to the point, they turned out to be, well, I had better results.
For my overall application, I wanted to have like a thread between all my answers. So like in my Common App essay, I talked about speaking Spanish, volunteering and like doing science. And later essays, I talk about how important my own culture is to me, as well as scientific curiosity. And during my summer, I talked about like volunteering and stuff. So I made sure there was a consistent thread throughout the entirety of my application to show like who am I as a person, because I didn't want like each response to just shift immediately to something like completely different. I wanted it to be like a flow for the person reading through my application.